Goku will change levels. He will literally become a monster. A unique thing never seen before. Ultra Instinct Ozaru. This will be his trump card after the fight against Gohan. And I will prove it to you, but only on one condition. If you stay until the end. So pay attention, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the notification bell. The idea of Goku reaching a new level by awakening an Ozaru guided by Ultra Instinct works not only as a power escalation, but as a symbolic resolution of everything the character has represented since classic Dragon Ball up to the current stage of the canon. After the fight against Gohan, which would not be just a physical confrontation, but a direct clash between two concepts of evolution, Goku comes out different. Not defeated in the traditional sense, but confronted by a truth he always avoided fully facing. Gohan does not surpass him only in raw strength or latent potential. He forces Goku to realize that power is not born solely from the instinct to fight, but from the ability to coexist with all parts of oneself. This realization is the true trigger of the transformation, far more than any training or emotional outburst. Goku has always been an incomplete Saiyan in the most literal sense possible. He lost his tail early, broke his connection with the Ozaru before understanding what it meant, and spent his entire life seeking evolutions that denied his most primitive form. Super Saiyan Blue, and even Ultra Instinct represent paths of refinement, control, and detachment from raw instinct. However, Ultra Instinct was never about denying nature, but about acting without internal conflict. The paradox was always there. How can someone reach the pinnacle of instinct while ignoring the most instinctive part of their own race? The fight against Gohan exposes this flaw in a brutal way. While Gohan accesses a power born from the fusion of reason, emotion, and Saiyan heritage, Goku realizes that he still fights divided, always separating form, technique, and essence. The awakening of the Ozaru under the dominion of Ultra Instinct does not emerge as a traditional explosive moment, but as a heavy silence. The artificial moon or an equivalent energetic manifestation does not provoke uncontrolled fury, but a profound recognition. Goku does not resist the transformation, does not try to repress it, does not lose himself in it. For the first time, he accepts the Ozaru not as a curse or a savage state, but as a legitimate extension of himself. The body grows, the presence becomes overwhelming, but the eyes remain serene, empty of hesitation. There is no initial roar, only an absurd pressure that distorts the environment around him, as if space itself understood that something outside the normal scale had just been born. But this is not literal, rather it is within him, just as Gohan did. The relationship between Gohan and the Ozaru has always been one of the most underestimated in the entire Dragon Ball narrative, precisely because it was interrupted too early, but never truly resolved. Unlike Goku and Vegeta, who experienced the Ozaru as a recurring or strategic state, Gohan had a brief, traumatic, and deeply symbolic contact with this form. And it is exactly this trauma that creates the basis for understanding why Gohan's current power can indeed have an indirect and even conceptual connection to the Ozaru, even if this was never explicitly verbalized in the work. As a child, Gohan does not transform into an Ozaru by choice or combat instinct, but through total loss of control. The moon did not awaken Saiyan pride in him. It awakened fear, loneliness, and a power he himself did not understand. Gohan's Ozaru was not just destructive, it was an unconscious scream of a power that found no rational outlet. Unlike Vegeta, who saw the form as heritage and racial superiority, Gohan experienced it as something wrong, almost like a punishment for being different. This deeply shapes his relationship with his own potential. From an early age, Gohan associates extreme power with the loss of himself. This psychological detail is essential to understanding the current Gohan. Throughout his life, he has always sought paths that would allow him to access power without losing himself emotionally. The potential unlocked by Guru, the awakened state granted by Elder Kaioshin, and more recently the beast form all follow this same logic. Power that emerges without the need for blind rage, yet still carries an absurd intensity. What many ignore is that this pattern is born precisely as an unconscious reaction to the Ozaru. Gohan spends his entire life trying to prove to himself that he can be the strongest without becoming what terrified him as a child. The connection to the Ozaru is not aesthetic, but structural. The Ozaru was always a multiplier of raw power, a direct amplification of Saiyan essence without filters. The beast state works in a similar way, but internalized. Instead of the body growing and losing control, the energy condenses, becomes dense, almost suffocating. It is as if Gohan learned over the years to bend the concept of the Ozaru inward. He does not expand the body, he expands the presence. He does not grotesquely alter the physical form, but alters the perception of those who stand before him. The sense of threat is the same, only refined. There is also an important parallel in the emotional trigger. The Ozaru was activated by an uncontrollable external stimulus, the moon. Gohan's current power, on the other hand, is activated by a deeply emotional internal stimulus, protecting those he loves, especially paternal figures like Piccolo. In both cases, the power emerges when the conscious mind fails to contain something far greater. The difference is that the adult Gohan has learned not to fight against this flow. He no longer tries to suppress the internal monster. He accepts it, but redefines its form of existence. Narratively, this creates an interesting contrast with the idea of Goku's Ultra Instinct Ozaru. While Goku resolves his conflict by accepting the Ozaru in a literal and integrated way, Gohan resolves the same conflict in the opposite manner, by sublimating it. One embraces the primitive form and elevates it to technical perfection. The other absorbs primitive brutality and transforms it into conscious power, almost academic in its efficiency. Both reach an absurd level, but through different philosophical paths. Goku becomes the external synthesis of instinct. Gohan becomes the internal synthesis of potential. Gohan's current power, therefore, can be seen as a spiritual Ozaru, an echo of that childhood transformation that was never completed. He no longer needs the moon, the tail, or the loss of control. He carries the multiplier within himself, always latent, always dangerous, but now under an identity he chose to build. This explains why Gohan frequently makes power leaps that seem illogical under traditional training rules. He is not just evolving. He is releasing layers of something that was always there, since the first time he looked at the moon. This reading also reinforces why Gohan continues to be narratively special even when other characters reach divine techniques. He does not rely on gods, angels, or combat doctrines. His power is born from resolved internal conflict, not from learned technique. And this conflict begins exactly with the Ozaru, not as a form he masters, but as a shadow he overcomes. Therefore, yes, there is a clear, deep, and coherent connection between the Ozaru and Gohan's current power. Not a visible connection, but an emotional, conceptual, and structural one, which gives the character a unique identity within the mythology of Dragon Ball. Well, anyway, going back to Goku, in a new Ozaru form with instinct, he is not just bigger or stronger. He is silent, precise, impossible to predict. Ultra Instinct flows through the colossal body like an invisible river, causing every gigantic movement to be executed with absolute economy. A simple shift of the arm is equivalent to thousands of perfectly calculated attacks. There is no waste of energy, there is no excess. What once was synonymous with loss of control now becomes the purest form of control ever seen. Goku ceases to be just a fast fighter and transforms into a phenomenon, a force of nature that reacts even before hostile intent forms in the opponent. Narratively, this completely changes Goku's status in the universe. He ceases to be merely a mortal who achieved divine techniques and begins to occupy a hybrid territory, something that even the gods of destruction do not fully understand. Beerus does not see that form as a common threat, but as a statistical aberration, something that should not exist within the rules that sustain the universes. Whis, in turn, immediately understands what is before his eyes, and his silence carries more weight than any explanation. The Ultra Instinct Ozaru is not a technique. It is not a conventional transformation. It is the absolute synthesis between primitive instinct and transcendental consciousness. This is where the old concept comes in. Regarding this new form of Goku, it may be that the return of Super Saiyan 4, or something similar to Gohan's beast form, is coming. And yes, it could even resemble both, but not as a direct copy. The strength of this Goku Ozaru with Ultra Instinct lies precisely in absorbing elements from Gohan's beast and Super Saiyan 4, reinterpreting both on an existentially superior level. The appearance must communicate, at first glance, that it is familiar and at the same time wrong, as if two different evolutionary lines had crossed into something that should not exist. The closest visual base would still be Super Saiyan 4, because it already represents the Ozaru controlled and condensed into humanoid form. However, The Ultra Instinct Ozaru would not have the vivid red or the warm aspect of Super Saiyan 4. The fur would be shorter, denser, and silver gray in color, almost white, resembling metallic ash. In certain regions, shoulders, forearms, back, this fur would seem to dissolve into pure energy, creating the sensation that the body is oscillating between matter and instinct. The tail would be present, but not as a symbol of savagery. It would move slowly and precisely, reacting even before Goku thinks, functioning as a sensor of balance and hostile intent. In addition, we know that Toyotaro is the creator of Dragon Ball AF, and this information is extremely relevant to this discussion, including from a creative and editorial point of view. The current person responsible for the Dragon Ball Super manga, Toyotaro, was precisely the author of the famous Dragon Ball AF, which for years circulated as a myth among fans. AF was never official, but it was one of the most influential fan projects in the entire history of the franchise. And the central point here is that Toyotaro not only knows these concepts, but helped shape them in the collective imagination. In Dragon Ball AF, Toyotaro was already working exactly with ideas that today seem very close to what you are proposing. Evolutions that mix primitive Saiyan instinct with higher levels of consciousness, designs that dialogue with Super Saiyan 4, but go beyond it, and a more mythological reading of Goku's power. The very concept of a Goku who surpasses the traditional limits of transformation, ceasing to be just a warrior and becoming something almost outside the normal hierarchy, was already there, even if in an embryonic form. When Toyotaro officially takes over Dragon Ball Super, he cannot simply import Dragon Ball AF, because that does not belong to the canon, neither legally nor narratively. However, what he can do, and already does, is reinterpret ideas, reframe concepts, and present them under a new logic, now validated by the official structure of the work. Ultra Instinct is a clear example of this. It fulfills the same role that many final transformations in AF fulfilled. It is not just strength, it is combat philosophy, it is identity, bringing something like an Ultra Instinct Ozaru, or a form that references Super Saiyan 4 would not be a direct return to AF, but a conceptual homage. And this is something entirely plausible within the way Toyotaro works. He has already demonstrated, through various visual and narrative decisions, that he understands the weight of Dragon Ball GT, AF, and Classic Dragon Ball as parts of the fans' imagination, even if they are not officially canon. The path he usually follows is not to repeat, but to absorb and rebuild. The emotional impact of this on Goku is also fundamental. Unlike other transformations, he does not feel euphoria or pride. There is an almost melancholic calm, as if he had finally reached something that was always missing, but whose price is the realization that he has crossed an invisible line. He understands that this form cannot be used lightly, not because it is unstable, but because it alters the balance around it. Every step, every breath, affects the world in an irreversible way. The monster he becomes is not defined by appearance, but by the responsibility it carries. This Ultra Instinct Ozaru also dialogues directly with the legacy of classic Dragon Ball, and with the ending of Z. It connects the beginning and the end of Goku's journey in a circular way. The boy with a tail who looked at the moon without understanding what was happening transforms into the warrior who faces that same force with full awareness. There is no regression, there is integration. The past is not overcome, it is absorbed as a narrative trump card. This form is powerful because it does not invalidate the previous ones, but contextualizes them. Ultra Instinct in base form remains essential. Super Saiyan still has its symbolic value, but the Ultra Instinct Ozaru emerges as the definitive apex of Goku's Saiyan identity. Something unique, never seen before, impossible to replicate, because it does not depend solely on genetics or training, but on an entire lifetime of choices, losses, battles, and lessons. In the end, Goku does not become a monster in the classic sense of threat or lack of control. He becomes a monster in the mythical sense, an entity that breaks expectations and redefines limits. A living legend who does not fight to prove strength, but to maintain the balance of a universe that perhaps was not prepared for something like him. This transformation is not just a new level, it is a shift in existential status, and that is exactly why it works so well as the culmination of his journey after the fight against Gohan.